Welcome back to the Northwood University Freedom Seminar. To those of you who are here, those of you who are online, we have an expert in the field of monetary theory and economics, especially from the Austrian perspective, which I think is the correct perspective on monetary policy. As you know, a couple of speakers have brought it up. We are in a kind of scary situation right now when it comes to money, prices, and inflation. And here to explain how we got here and hopefully how we can get out of this, we have Professor Harry Veryser. Harry Veryser just informed me he actually started his teaching career here at Northwood many years ago. I was not aware of that. I knew that he was the chair of the econ program at Walsh College for many years, then at the University of Detroit Mercy. He's also one of the few economists who goes beyond the chalkboard and actually ran his own business in Detroit for many years and grew that business. So he approaches it from both a theoretical and a practical perspective. He has also taught at St. Mary's College, Orchard Lake, Hillsdale College, Thomas More College of Liberal Arts, and he has not only taught economics, but also coursework in history, ethics, and philosophy. So a bit of a Renaissance man, and I think you can ask him anything. So please welcome Professor Harry Veryser.
Thanks, Dale. Now, if I move around, can you hear me in the back if I don't have the microphone? Can you hear me, sir? Good. I have to tell you, I was at Northwood when we were under the gold standard before, just after Nixon broke that. So I'm a veteran of Northwood. My brother graduated from here. My sister came here. And I was here when Northwood just had a few buildings. That was my first college experience. Okay, and really got me teaching in college as well as being in business. So I have a great fondness for Northwood. And I will tell you, you really have to thank the Northwood department here for the right to work law. They did all the research. Dr. Dash and Dr. Melchick did all the research that convinced the governor finally to go along with it. And I think, in a sense, it's going to help the Michigan economy in spite of the fact that we may have somewhat of a turndown. I can tell you about the shortages. My brother's in business. He ordered aluminum in September, and they're promising, now last September, they're promising to have the aluminum May 1st. You can imagine the shortages that are going on. But I want to talk about it because I want to talk about what monetary policy is. And this thing works. Computers hate me for some, okay, good. We always start out with the definitions, okay? And we start with the definitions, what is monetary policy? And monetary policy, it refers to the control of credit and currency. Now, remember in the United States, only about 7% is hand-to-hand cash. The rest of it are bank deposits and reserves. So when we talk about the Federal Reserve, it really controls bank reserves. Okay. Now there's some misnomer, kind of the pedestrian way of saying they print money. What they really do is create reserves. And it's generally monetary policy is the central bank's control of the supply of money. And the idea is that if you control the supply of money, you control the economy. Now, there's a major problem with that. Going backwards now. Okay. And what happens when you create money? Okay, and what disciplines the supply of money? Because your professors tell you, don't create money. Say what? It's the supply of money. So what disciplines the supply of money? And when we talk about it, there are two major systems. Okay? There's the gold standard, or a commodity standard that controls the supply of money, or there's discretionary control of the supply of money by a central bank, producing what is essentially fiat money. Those are the only two systems. We are presently, since 1971, and I remember August 15th, 7 o'clock, when President Nixon got on the TV, and my sister said, "Harry, you were so mad, you almost put your foot through that TV set for President Nixon for what he did." Because I knew from the Austrian theory that would happen. So I'm going to go through what I saw for 50 years, and then we'll talk about the questions that you'll have. You're sure going to have a lot of them, I'm sure. Okay? Now, what happens when you increase the money supply? Because you can't increase the money supply all at once. So some people are going to get the money first. And we call that the Cantillon effect. I watched the Cantillon effect. It's going to be probably, if I can get to it, the second book I'll write will be on what happened from 1971 to today. Okay, it came from Richard Cantillon. He was born in 1697, 1734. He was kind of a shyster. He was involved with the Bank of France, printing out paper money. And if you have a chance, there's a book called John Law, the Father of Paper Money, that describes what happened in France around 1700, a little bit after that. And Cantillon did write a book on what happens when you print money, and we call it the Cantillon effect. Okay? Now, Richard Cantillon explained, and you can read this. I think George was going to make this slide show available.
Yes.
Okay? So there'll be sources on here and other things that you may want to do further research on. Okay? And he explained that the first ones to receive the money are the ones who benefit. I mean, suppose I came in and printed up a pile of paper money, and I said, you can have a choice. You can get it first, you can get it last. And all of you would say, what? Well, right now, I want to get the money before the prices go up. Okay? And that's what Cantillon said. And he said, he noticed that money comes into the hands of savers, interest rate would decrease, but then what happens is it starts to increase. Now, this here, I put down the websites you can go to. So if you want to do some research on that, you can go to these various websites. Just go into my presentation, so you have all. Now, I'm going to go a little fast because you can read this, okay? So what happens is this. Cantillon effect. Now, who gets the money first? On the fellow. He has government contracts. He's on the cost. He's on cost. Or he's right borrowing the money from banks first. In other words, he's in New York. He can borrow money from the Federal Reserve at low interest rates. Okay, this company can. And go into the stock market and buy stock. And get themselves involved in stock buybacks. Therefore, I'm going to show you what happens. You just raise the price of the stock. Okay? That's part of it. It's fueling the stock market. Stock buybacks. Okay? Now, these folks are getting the money first. The gentleman here, he's just treading water. His wages are going up as fast as prices are. But these folks over here, okay, they're getting the money last. They're the people who are on fixed income. If you're on fixed income, the prices go up, you're getting the money last. Okay? However, for here, you have some kind of inflationary business, you're doing nicely, thank you. Okay? Now, this here is very interesting. He said, what do you mean prices have gone up? I just got in line.
It really says
Yes, I won.
really
Okay.
inflation.
If I can post this. Doing what I don't want to do. Okay, so what's happening is, you're seeing this now. If you go buy gasoline, now you go to the store and buy stuff, what you're seeing is, hey, wait a minute. I just got in line. All of a sudden, the meat prices have gone up, and the gasoline prices have gone up, etc. Okay? I put in some cartoons because my students like it. I have to tell you, it is so good be in a class of real live people. Okay, I'm tired of online. Who gets like first? All right, come on. Okay. Now it really says affect all prices in the same stance. Because remember, inflation affects everybody differently. Depends what you buy. For example, I got a Lincoln that I bought for about for about $5,000. Don't ever buy new cars. I shouldn't say that word. I buy a lot of air. I don't buy it. Okay. $60,000. But my auto expenses are just gasoline and repair. I'm not have a loan or anything. So automobile prices don't affect me. Or my residence is practically paid off. So it doesn't matter. I'm not paying rent. Okay? So is inflation going to affect me that much? Well, I probably won't buy a lot of staples or whatever else. But I'm not going to be as affected as some poor person who, let's say, they have to pay the gasoline price, and they're having a minimum wage job, and all of a sudden they've got 50 miles to go, and they're paying for it. In other words, some people come in for a few bucks. Yes, well, all of a sudden, that's what's added to their budget. So it depends where you stand. Now, inflation does, like a magnet, and it'll pull resources away. So think if you were playing Monopoly, you had a printing press, you're playing with Monopoly money. Well, you're going to end up owning the whole thing. Because no matter what it is, you're going to pull the resources towards you because you've got the cash to do it. And we'll show you what's happening to you. Money is not neutral. Okay? If I were to give you guys, let's say we came in and we said, everybody gets a bottle of water. You have a bottle of water, your body would use it, and this is water's neutral. Let's say we gave each one a bottle of scotch. I said to pass this course, you got to drink the scotch right here, right now, next to us. Most of us, including me, couldn't get out of the room. Right? It's not neutral, but it passed. Now, there are certain types of pharmaceuticals and illegal drugs you can take. They change your body completely, forever. Inflation is like that. It changes patterns of wealth, patterns of investment, patterns of standard of living over the time it goes. All right, this is more neutrality of money. Money is not neutral. Okay, now the question is the gold standard. Now, it's my feeling that I remember when I was in class and I had the Latin teacher, Father O'Neill, and I said, Plato felt. And this big Irishman said, Mr. Veryser, you don't feel a thought, you think a thought. Okay? So every time I say, I feel, correct me. All right? So we talk about the gold standard. And I was helped by one of my students who's now teaching, Matt Fisher, at Ivy Tech. Will we return to a gold standard? Yes. That's coming. The beginning of it was what the Russians did. Okay, now, I know there's I don't want to get into the war. I'm one who thinks that war is a big waste that should have been avoided. All right, I can go through that when we talk about inflation and war and the destruction of currencies and the destruction of empire. But that takes a long time. So we're asking about a gold standard. Will we have it? What is it? Okay, now, I always get the question, should we invest in gold mines or in gold? Investment in gold is different than a gold standard. A gold standard limits the money supply. Investment in gold should be made the same way you invest in any other product. We should invest on its profitability, on the financial strength of that company, etc. So I always correct people because they come out and say, well, should I buy gold? Okay. Well, it depends what mine you're going to buy. And it depends, is the mine profitable? Okay, so you have to ask those questions. That's different than the gold standard. It's a traditional hedge against inflation. It's a means of protecting assets from government confiscation. I understand that Canadian people are now buying gold rather than putting money in banks after what Trudeau did by confiscating bank deposits. Terrible mistake. All right? Now, gold is monetary standard. Currencies are defined by a specific weight of gold. They're convertible to gold on demand. And they're convertible to banknotes on demand. So when I was in college, before we had student loans, and we'll get into that, I could go to the bank and give them $5, and they would give me 5 ounces of silver dollars. Or I could take the silver dollars in, because it's kind of weighty in my pocket, and say, here's the silver dollars. There's the $5 note. Okay? So when you have a pure gold standard, it has to be convertible, and it's convertible at a specific weight. As more countries will adopt gold, it will become an international standard. Okay? And central banks, the only job of the central bank, the only monetary policy, is to keep the currency convertible. There's a great book written, I assigned it to my students when I was teaching graduate students, called Economics and the Public Welfare. And it's the history of what happened between 1914 and 1940. And the economist who wrote it was actually involved in New York banking, and he points that out. Okay? Now, currencies are aligned to one another through like the gold. This is my math teacher, Sister Mary Margaret, and she said, things equal to the same thing are equal to one another. Okay? So what happens is the dollar, the pound sterling, the euro, the yen would all be transferable into gold at a certain weight. And then what would happen is you'd have the dollar, which before Franklin Roosevelt, dollar was worth the 20th of an ounce of gold. Okay? British pound was a quarter of an ounce of gold. The French franc was an 80th of an ounce of gold. And they would exchange on those ratios. And there were no exchange rate speculation going on. Because remember, prior to 1971, the only exchange rate kind of speculation there was is could the banks turn it into gold. But most of the time, you didn't go to the airport, like I'm sure all of you done, you know, see this is where you change money. It was all in gold. It was backed by gold at a certain ratio, and it was maintained for over 100 years. Okay? Now, nations manipulate currencies to expand imports and limit import, exports and limit imports. You can't do that under gold. Okay? So you can't have currency devaluations to spur the economy because you can't print gold. In order to do that, you print money. Okay? You expand money supply, or you contract the money supply, and you can manipulate the value. So what happens is, and this is where I have kind of a disagreement with a lot of my fellow economists, is this. You can't have, in my opinion, a free market economy and have a fiat money system. Because a fiat money system introduces into the economy Cantillon effect, and it is not market. The gold standard operates according to market. You start printing money, you got the Cantillon effect. You don't have a free market because now one of the major forces in the economy is not market. It's decisions by central bankers and politicians. So what happens is during the 30s, okay, and one of the reasons for World War I or World War II, which if I was teaching history, you go into that, I keep you here all night telling all the stories about that. But it was a manipulation of currencies because countries were lowering the value of their currency. They were manipulating it. And the United States manufacturers went to Herbert Hoover and said, look, we're getting chased out of the world markets because the currency, they're undervaluing their currency. And so there was the pressure to put on tariffs to protect us, supposedly, from goods and services coming in because of the monetary manipulation. Now, I'll give you an example of that. All my life, when I was a boy, my dad and I used to hang out a lot together, and we used to go to the travel show. And I wanted the worst way. I'd go through and I'd look at that, and I wanted to take the Canadian train across Canada. So about 2000, okay, the Canadian dollar was 65 cents, and the American dollar was $1. So it was $1,000 to travel on this train, Canadian, and $650 American. Well, all of a sudden, that was a real bargain for me. See what I mean? Because the Canadians' currency had fallen, they were manipulating it. When you can't manipulate the currencies, it doesn't get into the marketplace. So the economy operates on what? Competition. Because you don't have the monetary advantage coming in. Okay, today under the floating exchange rates, there's no common value. It's all supply and demand every day. And it's manipulated. Okay? It enables governments and central banks to change currency values by increasing or decreasing the supply of money and credit. And it's used supposedly to stimulate economies. All right? Under an international gold standard, currency manipulation becomes very difficult, if not impossible. Now, this is a very important point. Scott is a good friend of mine. I think he's spoken here. The worldwide gold supply increases 2 to 2.5% a year. That's how much gold we mine. About half of that goes into jewelry. Okay, so about half of it is monetary gold. Half of it is, people wear crucifixes and various types of bracelets in gold. And economies are related to one another on the basis of opportunity, cost, and competition. They're not related because you intervene in the marketplace to artificially manipulate. Now, if you take a look at the value of money, there's two factors. There's the increase in the supply of money. Prices rise. Right? There's also the increase in goods over money. In other words, one of the wonderful things, even though we've had a terrible monetary policy, you and I are living much better than we ever did because the supply of goods and services was faster in the terms of technology. And not in terms of what you could buy, but in terms of technology, we're living at a much better thing. But that's the market. The market provided you and I with this thing and cars that go 250,000 miles and whatever else. That was improvements in the market. And what we say is that prices will fall. So what we say is increased productivity tends to lower prices. Okay? Okay. Increased medium exchange tends to raise prices. So there's a race going on. Now, the magnificent thing about gold is, okay, this is the increase, it was taken from a mining journal, of the supply of gold from 1900, okay, and you can see it increases about 2 to 2.5% a year. So the amount of gold increases about 2 to 2.5% a year. All right. The growth of the economy, on average, and this goes back to about 1832. There's this great economist, Deidre McCloskey, who's done a study on economic growth. I recommend her work to you. It's rather voluminous, but she does a great job. And average growth, so this is financial data, is about 2% a year. So they're pretty parallel. Okay? Now, look what's happened. This is the commodity price Bureau of Labor Statistics. Look at the price level from the founding of the country, okay, to World War I, gold standard. Prices hardly change at all. Now, they do change because of war. Okay? There's nothing more wasteful than that. But then take a look what happens about 1971 when Mr. Nixon broke the gold standard. Prices have soared after that. Okay, this is the U.S. purchasing power. Well, this is about CPI, and it shows you this is prior to 1914. And you can see, in terms of purchasing power, what the dollar really bought. Okay, the present day problem of the Cantillon effect is the distribution of wealth and income. Okay? So under gold, it's minimal. There is a little bit of an effect. But economist Edmund Cannon, C-A-N-N-A-N, studied the Cantillon effect prior to World War I of gold. So there is a little bit of effect, but because you're not dealing with a lot of money, it doesn't have that marked effect. And increase is in productivity. The prices for goods and services then reflect productivity. Increase in productivity are passed on through falling prices. And I always, since this is now automotive school, always cite Mr. Ford. Okay, I have all my students read about Henry Ford because increased productivity because of his invention and because of the production line. He was able to pay his workers $5 a day. So kids ask me, they say, what's $5 a day? I said, in 1910, they started this, 1908. An ounce of gold was $20. He was paying his workers a quarter of an ounce of gold a day. That was an ounce and something. By the way, there were no income tax stuff then. And it would have been equivalent to about $2,000 a week in cash. Because there's no deductions. There's no Michigan income tax, Detroit income tax, federal income tax, all that. None of that before Wilson. Okay? So what happened was, during this time, the increases in productivity are passed directly to the consumer because prices fall. So the question is, who does that benefit, right? Okay? The law of regression. I think this was referred to by Dr. Nash. Economic changes of basic commodities affect people to a greater extent as one moves down the income scale. Now, let me explain that. If the price of gasoline, let's say, goes to $25 a gallon, does that affect Bill Gates? I mean, he loses more money on the sofa at night. Right? Does it affect somebody on the minimum wage law? Oh, you betcha. Okay, now, if the price of gas goes to 50 cents a gallon, does a guy as wealthy as Gates care? Gasoline is a minute proportion of his expenditures. But to the poor person on minimum wage law, that represents a tremendous increase in income. So the law of regression says the lower you are on the income scale, the more rising prices, therefore inflation, will affect you. Now, if we said the advantage of gold standard, it's easy to produce, high level of international exchange rate. The price specie mechanism is an inboard, it balanced trade, and it provides a fully secured system of settlement for international transactions. Because you don't have governments confiscating your bank accounts. Okay, implications of the gold standard. If they act as an external discipline, the money supply would not increase much more than 2.5%. I think there would be no such thing as dumping what the Federal Reserve does of dumping this kind of money in the economy, 7, 8, 9, 10% a year. That's over. Okay? governments would have to borrow in capital markets to balance their budgets. Dr. Melchek and I were talking before my talk. Present administration wants a $2 trillion budget deficit. Okay, now they got two choices. They go to the Fed and the Fed can print the money, or they can go to you and borrow the money. The statistics I read last night, American savings are $1 trillion, 5%. We have a $20 trillion economy. We saved $1 trillion. They would have to borrow all of your savings, all of the savings in the economy twice to meet that budget deficit. Now, you and I know that's not going to happen because they're going to put the bonds in the market and they're going to beg China and maybe Russia and a bunch of other countries, would you please buy our bonds? And the bonds that are not bought will be monetized by the Federal Reserve. Okay? Under gold, that becomes absolutely impossible. And what would happen is these politicians would have to sit down, just like you and I do, with a budget and say, okay, how much can we afford? Because remember, we're only taxing. This is a very serious problem. We're taxing about $2.5 trillion. If you take a look at what the government takes in, about $2.5 trillion, and they want to spend $5 trillion. And they're spending twice as much as they're collecting. I don't know about you, but, you know, I'd be bankrupt in about 6 months if I tried to do that. Okay? And so you have to understand, government has a balance sheet of what comes in and what goes out. And gold tends to put the brakes on that. Okay? The economic stimulation will be dependent on lowering costs and reasonable regulations. Exchange rate should be predictable. Income would depend on productivity. The productivity dividend, that's what we get from increased productivity, would be spread basically to the lower income groups first. Okay? This is U.S. debt. Now this is World War I, World War II. Okay? Okay, now the Bretton Woods Agreement came in. This is a quasi-gold structure. And up to about 1970, 71, the government was not, and most of us were not in debt. Then what happened? Okay? Look at the increase in the federal debt. Now, I tell my students this, I said, you know, I went to all private school. I graduated with no debt. None of my classmates graduated with debt. There was no such thing. And I tell my students, I said, go home and ask your grandma, how much debt they had when they walked out of college with the diploma. 0. What we've introduced is people that keep up with the inflation, as they've gone in further and further into debt. And so we'll go through and show you that, okay? Now, this is for those of you who are religious, okay? You can close your ears if you don't hear it, but I'm going to tell you. All right? In the book of Revelation, it says that the angel of Revelation measures the gold standard. Now, how is it that gold increases about the same amount as productivity? Is it providential? Is it part of God's plan? I don't know. But I always put this in, and if you're an atheist, don't worry about it. But if you're a theist, you got to take a look at it. You got to say, you know, there's something more to this than just what we're looking at, right? Because I taught philosophy and do that all the time. Tell my students, all right, you want to see the order of the universe? Well, there it is, okay? All right. Okay, what's the downside? What's wrong with gold? Discipline. Okay? It is discipline. Gold standards require discipline. Okay? They're great when they work, but your government cannot go into all these crazy wars. I have a whole presentation on the history of inflation. Every one of these doggone empires that went on paper money or inflated the Spanish did with gold, every one of them were bureaucratized, raised taxes, and went to war. And they collapsed very quickly afterward. Okay? Okay. The U.S. stopped the gold standard in August 15, 1971. I have another friend of mine who was a professor at University of Michigan, Ross Wilhelm. He died shortly after that. He said that Ross came to the class. He was so mad he's actually throwing chairs around. I never quite got to that stage. Okay, because I was teaching at Northwood in 71. Okay, and it said the gold standard did not apply. Governments abolished it, paved the way for inflation. Okay, now it talks about this. Yeah, now let's go to the Federal Reserve. Let's see what happened in the last 50 years with fiat money, right? Who makes the decision? 5 members of the Federal Reserve Board, majority of the Open Market Committee. They make the decision. Plus, the U.S. Congress makes the decision. And today, we don't have fiscal policy. We only have monetary policy because we just put it on the credit card. There really isn't any fiscal restraints. Oh, you want a war? We'll print up the money. You want this? We'll print up the money. We'll print up the money. So they all depend on the Fed as being able to buy the bonds. Okay? And so the fundamental objective of monetary policies is aid the economy in achieving full employment. Okay? The Fed changes the money supply. And to change the money supply, it manipulates, by the way, I got this from Fed documents, it manipulates the reserves by banks. Okay? The goals of the Fed is to regulate the money supply, translate that print, serving as the government's bank, clearing checks and loans. But what's happening is their announced goal is, I used to have a cartoon, I didn't put it in here. It had a picture of this is published by the New York Fed. It had a picture of the Federal Reserve. We had open market operations, reserve requirements, 3 bells. On the other side coming was money coming. Get the New York Fed, they have a cartoon on that for kids. Okay, monetary policy. Now this is the goals. Price stability. Now think of it now. They're trapped. They've got a political problem. Because people go to the gas pump, and that's going to determine how they're going to vote. They say, don't tell me there isn't inflation. Look at this here, right? They want high employment. Now, the employment thing is being skewed by these government subsidies. They got to keep the economy going. They want to keep the market stable. And they're also want to make sure the stock market doesn't crash. If that crashes, they really got trouble. Okay? Now, this is the Fed. This is the Bureau of Weight. Now, the Fed doesn't print money. The federal government, Bureau of Engraving, prints the money. The Fed makes an order of how much money they need. Now, only 7% of the medium of exchange is actually hand-to-hand cash carried in the pocket. The rest of it, bank reserves. Okay? So when we say the Fed prints money, what they do is they credit the account of member banks to increase or decrease the money supply. If we had more time, I'd go through all that. But I asked Dr. Melchick, he said, you've been through it in your macro class, how they do that. Okay, now, this is what happened by Wright Patton. Wright Patton was from Texas, a conservative Democrat at the time, and he said this. He was pretty angry about it. The dollar represents $1 of debt in the Federal Reserve System. They create money out of thin air to buy government bonds in the U.S. Treasury. And it has created out of nothing a debt which the American people are obliged to pay. Okay? This is a government bond. Now, what a government bond says is we borrow the money now and we promise the taxpayers, you and me, pay the interest on the national debt. Not to pay it off, they're going to pay it off. But a bond, remember, when they issue a bond, they're committing you and I to pay the interest. And if you take a look at the amount of money that the federal government collects, and the proportion they're paying in interest is 20%. So one out of every $5 that you pay in taxes is going to pay the interest on the national debt right now. Don't count what the budget's. Just count the amount of money they collect. They say the budget is only 5 or 7%. The rest of that budget is half borrowed. So you go, I always go to, how much are you collecting? How much are you going to have to pay in interest on the national debt? 20%. Now, if you add the interest plus the Social Security and the Medicare payments, you're up above the federal government maybe has 30 cents discretionary power. When the French monarchy fell, there's a great book called Fiat Money Inflation in France. French monarchy was paying 65% of its budget to pay interest on the French national debt. That's what brought an end to the monarchy, unfortunately. What came in, terror after that. So they go to, and by the way, I got this from Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. Fred, you want to do research? Fred is a great source. Just type in Fred and they'll give you an account and all the kind of information you want. Okay? So today's financial system rests on the basis of fiat money and credit expansion. I took this here. I don't remember that. Well, it's only a paper moon over a cardboard sky. It wouldn't be make-believe if you believe the lie, right? In other words, it's a make-believe printing money. All right. So I got this here. This was a movie that was paper moon. Welcome to the economics of inflation. This was a movie. I think you can get it. It's really interesting movie. I figured this would. You can see she's with the dog in the sky. Paper moon. All right. Okay. What happened? Progressive Democrat Lyndon Baines Johnson signs the Coinage Act of 1965, which repeals an act by George Washington in 1792 that said you can't tamper with the money supply. And if I am right, that act provided, if you did that, capital punishment. They're real serious at that. All right. On June 24th, 1967, Lyndon Johnson signed the sunset provision on convertible dollars and silver. At one time, every dollar, if you read the dollar, go on the internet, it said this note is paid to the bearer on demand $1 worth of silver, which is a 90% silver. When I taught Northwood, I taught at high school, at girls' high school. It was in 72. And I promised all the girls, I said, if you guys get all A's on your exam, I'll give you a silver dollar at the end of class. I got out of 30 students, 15 all A's.
Wow.
So when you pay them real money, stuff happens. Stuff happens. I grew up with this silver. That I had silver coins in my pocket. If any of you go to a vending machine and 4 silver quarters drop out, how many of you will spend them? You'll spend the junk, right? You won't spend the silver. Okay? All right. But in other words, a lot of times I would give my godchildren this stuff, silver dollars at Christmas. They're all grown up, some of them have grandchildren. They have the silver dollars. That's real stuff. Johnson signed another law suspending the requirement of a 25% gold backing. That was called the gold cover. This was all to finance that wonderful war in Vietnam. Okay? Completely avoidable. All right. These are the two guys. Establishment Republican Richard Nixon. And they disciplined gold. Progressive Democrat Johnson. There's not much difference between establishment Republicans and progressive Democrats. If you take a look at the history of what these characters have done, you're shocked. The rest of the world follows. Ending a 50-year political experiment of political money and inflation. Now, what happened since then? Decline of the dollar. All right. What else happened? The value of the dollar. And by the way, you can go on, if you want to check it, on Bureau of Labor Statistics, inflation calculator, and you can put in a year, and then you can put in another year, and it will tell you how much money you have to spend now to get what you could the first year. Okay? Inflation calculator is there. Worth about 5 cents, what it was before Mr. Wilson. Okay, now this is the inflation calculator. I put this in for 2020. Okay? In 1971, what would $100 buy? What would you have to have today to buy the same stuff? $627 and 67 cents. Comes right out to the cents. So you want to do that tonight as a homework. Have some fun and just put some stuff in. It's really interesting. And it's good for term paper. Because you can't, how are you going to debate Bureau of Labor Statistics? All right? Okay. Now what else happened? This is the cumulative inflation starting 1970. This is our cumulative inflation. That's where the $600 came from Hungary. Now, in the last part purchase bar, I was able to buy gold. I should have bought more at $35 an ounce. Today, it was around 2,000 or something. Cui bono? To whose benefit? Who benefited from this? Remember, we said the Cantillon effect, right? All right. Here's this report. By the way, today, wages, even though they're increasing, are not keeping up with the shark. Not keeping up with inflation. All right? This is the effects of inflation on the people who get taken to the cleaners. Okay? The income effect, affecting the distribution of income, which affects the standard of living. Those with well-paying jobs are income exceeding inflation. Dr. Nash covered that. Receive more income, they keep pace. Those whose incomes do not keep pace, they're going to the cleaners. That's what we used to call it when I don't know, they used that phrase I could work. When you get taken to the cleaners, you get taken to the cleaners, right? Okay, what else happened? This is the household income, right? Now, this is real household income. The red is the nominal growth. That's what they tell you you're getting. The blue is what you actually can buy. And this is from research company. It's there if you want to take a look at it. Right? All of a sudden, this is the important thing. This is one of the most important statistics. What happened with productivity? The American economy is one of the most productive in the world. Productivity soared. What happened to the wages of the manufacturing worker? Since 1971. Stalled, right? Okay? Inflation was first used in 1917 to finance World War I. What they did is they doubled the money supply to have that war. Wonderful investment. Well, Stalin and Hitler. Okay, now we go on. How do you know your standard of living has gone down? Okay, when I graduated from college, a good hunk of my class, I was going to weddings, and a good hunk of my class was getting married, and they could support the family on one income. All of my students today, if they get married that young, they say, well, I have to work with my partner has to. In other words, what's happened is, if you have to have both working, in other words, if a household has to contribute 2 workers rather than 1 worker, the wages have gone down because you have to produce more work to get the same income. Okay? And this also means, which is another big problem, that we are in a demographic decline. People ask me, who's going to pay your Social Security? Your kids are, because it's a pay-as-you-go system. So I tell my classes, you better count having 3 or 4. Because why? The fertility rate is 1.6. That's not, even with immigration, that's not a replacement. Okay? Now we can argue about the social effects, that's a different thing. I'm just telling you the economic effects. As both spouses are working, now here about half the houses work. Okay? Now the husband only, let's just say 1 paycheck. 21% on it. Fortunately, in my family, and I was asked this question from the students, I said, did Dan Ellis work? Did Irene work? And Olive work? And I went through the whole family. None of them worked. 1 paycheck. 1 paycheck to support the family. Now, the women who did not have children, there were some who physically couldn't, they worked till they had 2 paychecks. But the rest of them, you could support a family with 1 paycheck. Okay? Now, the RAND report. I put this in here for you guys if you're going to do research. A lot of that stuff's in there so you can get the public research to do it. According to RAND Corporation, what has been transferred since, this is RAND, government operation, but this is the paper, by the way, it's 62 pages long, proving it. It was in Time magazine, that's the short version. I don't click much of Time, but at least they have a good article once in a while. $50 trillion of income has been transferred by the process of inflation. You can't get out of that. $2.5 trillion a year is being transferred through inflation. That's from the regular people who work upwards. So I said, where'd the money go? Okay? The bottom 90% less secure. How was it that my uncle Myron, his wife never worked, put his kids through college working on law and question? They got degrees. No debt. And I'm just showing you the real effects of this thing. Okay? The $50 trillion theft. That's just going to be taken from you this year. They're estimating between $2,500 and $5,200 per household. That's enough to pay college. Was what I read. Okay? I'll tally it up. Now this is RAND. This is not a right-wing fly-by-night outfit. This is government studies. I always try to use their studies. I'll just leave that for you. Someone that said, and it talks about what people would have been earning had we had no inflation, our gold standard. Okay? This is for men. Of men, look at about 1971, the men's salary did what? It peaked and hardly a raise afterwards. And I argue with people. I say, look, whenever you have to pay all those student loans off, figure how much you really are taking. Are you gaining because you got to pay that debt off, which we didn't have to pay. One of the reasons I'm a little bit more comfortable in retirement. Okay. This is up to 71. This is done by, I think they're a good outfit, Real Investments. The green represents the assets that people had available to pay debt. Okay? Now about 19, notice how it goes down from 70, and now we're head over heels in debt. Head over heels in debt. What they've done is borrow the money to keep the standard of living up. Okay? There it is, folks. College tuition. Okay? What happens is American incomes cannot keep up with college tuition increases. Okay? I mean, ask your parents. If they're helping you, I hope they're all helping you some way. You can't keep up. Median income, relatively flat. college, this was of 2008. Okay, this is the index. This is since 85. Consumer prices have gone up about, this is 2011, about doubled. College tuition about 5 times. Okay, now women have fared better. This is the real income per capita, and this is women's income has done much better. Okay. Okay, and that's because of more education. Where did the money go? Okay. The differential prices give a clue. Notice this is the CPI. This is regular prices. Economic inflation, education inflation index, shares, stock, okay, listed property. Okay, disposable income, notice the real income always falls behind nominal. Okay, this is what people spend their money on. This is what most people in lower income groups spend. Well, all of a sudden there's housing, food, okay? Now as these go up, and this is the problem, because the lower income people, and that's probably most of us, because we're not millionaires, okay? They're spending more and more, right? They're at the end of the line as the inflation goes on. Okay? This is the distribution of wealth. Now this came from leftists, but notice 1920, 1917 had an inflation that cranked up the Great Depression. That's a whole other story. Then what happened was, now this is the 25%. 25%, their share of national income fell. In other words, they were making money, but the lower income people were making money faster. Till when? Until about 81, they started to kick in. And now they've fallen as their share of national income. Now leftists tell you what we got to do is have taxes. That's the worst thing. I don't understand why they don't understand it can't be anything. All right? This is what's happened to household income, the top. Okay? And they're complaining now about the maldistribution of income. It's all due to Cantillon. The whole thing. And they don't even recognize it because most of them, they don't want to turn off the press. Okay? Income gains. You see? Everybody was median income gain. What happened? You had the differential going on. Okay? Okay? This is, notice college tuition, these statistics, this is the Bureau of Labor Statistics. College tuition is increasing faster than medical care. And I think that's dependent on how you measure it. This here again is college tuition and fees. So, now, why is college tuition going up faster than everything else? Okay? Because the federal government is pumping money into the educational system through student loans. Now, this really is a bugaboo for me as a professor. Okay? I gave a talk on my book at Central Michigan University. One of the professors from the econ department came up. Prof, I want to show you something. On the board, 1971 to today, 41% more students. How much more faculty? 42% more faculty. How many more bureaucrats? I said 100%, 636%. There's more bureaucrats at Yale than there are freshmen entering Yale. We have added layer on layer on layer for these stupid accrediting associations, which should be busted up. They're absolutely worthless. I haven't even had to deal with them. And all they've done, add layer and layer and layer and layer. It has happened in medical too. I didn't have the chart on medical. You take a look, number of doctors is like this. Number of administrators is like that. I go into my doctor's office. There's one doctor. there's 4 or 5 people behind the desk filling out paperwork. Who's paying for that? Okay? In other words, by shoveling the money in, what it's done is just create an opportunity for these folks to get their share of the loot. I mean, it's incredible. You look at it. Okay, I think we went. Okay. Okay. It becomes clear. Stock buybacks. Now, a lot of these, what's happening is a lot of these corporations, what they're doing, borrowing money from the Fed because they can get it cheap, and they run back and buying the stock, and it's pushing the market up. Now, one of the things that's very dangerous, they start raising this interest rate. Those corporations are going to start dumping that stuff, okay? Because it's debt. They're going to want. Now, why does a corporation want debt? Because you can write off interest on your tax returns. You can't write off dividends. One of the reforms, I don't really want to have any different. One of the reforms I would say is has to be equal. Let the amount paid for capital and the amount paid interest on the debt be either tax-free or at the same rates. Because all we're doing is having these corporations go further and further in the debt to buy back their own stock. So a stock, wealthiest 1% own 35% stocks, next 48%, and together the 10% wealthiest own 80% stocks and mutual funds. Okay, now there's this. Matt did this for me. He looked up all the zip codes as far as wealth, wherever. Now it's all here, right? Years ago, it would be in Detroit and Chicago and other places that make things. These people are borrowing money, and they're getting nice salaries, etc. I don't regret it if they produce it. This is margin debt. This is up to 2015. Okay, this is the margin debt. People borrowing money to buy stocks. And you can see the price is going right up. Okay. In 1980, the financial industry was 6%. Today it's 50%. 50%. And so what's happening is the supply of credit increases the size of the financial sector away from the industrial area. Now, there's a whole bunch of other reasons. This means the Fed creates, the Fed is creating a credit to cover government expenditure. Okay, this is how they do it. I'll put that out for you guys because you're going to get this download, which is great. Okay, these are the wealthiest counties in the United States. Notice where they're all close to. Drive down to Washington, you'll see acres and acres of mansions. Now I challenge you to ask what do they produce? Right? They're manipulating. This is versus households, 2014. They're all near government. Okay? Lobbying, seeking regulation. They're all there, trying to get regulation in their favor. And the lobbyists are all down there doing it. Okay? This is to who's good. That's cui bono. What's happening? This is us down here, folks. Okay, this is the annual growth in productivity. Notice it was in the 50s, 60s, and all of a sudden, up to 2014, we have about 1.4% growth. Okay, long-term development, the U.S. trade balance, all of a sudden the trade balance shifted. Now the reason for that is, remember 1971, the United States was actually shipping out more goods and services than we were taking in. Our merchandise balance was positive under the gold standard. Okay. What happened? Well, this thing moves so fast. Okay. All of a sudden, the trade balance shifted. Now that was due to something called the deindustrialization. 25% were in manufacturing, now only 12. It's worse now. And that was due, I got this. I'll go back. That slide again. It was called the effect of being, because remember we switched from being the gold and dollars, a reserve currency. And a Belgian economist, and I have this slide here. Oh, I did. Actually, no, I don't have the slide. What happened was it was a paradox. And the paradox was, the man's name will come to me in a minute. As you get older, names are a little more difficult. I remember the ideas. I give you all kinds of lectures. Remembering the names probably will come. During the Bretton Woods Agreement was not perfect. It was a mixed standard. And a few more minutes, okay. And what happened was, it started to deindustrialize the United States. We can go into that in the question. Okay, this is Keynes, government can confiscate, and that's in the economics of the peace. I think that's his best book. Okay, inflation is like a huge vortex, pulling resources from one part of the economy to the source of money and credit, change the pattern of investment, wealth, and income, favors those who have access to credit first. It's difficult for goods. The gold standard immediately, the merchant. Now, this is the Triffin paradox. You may want to look this up if you have a chance. We don't have much time. Okay? But the Triffin paradox. You explain that. And so we'll go backing, manipulation of currencies. Okay? As we're losing jobs, that's why we became deindustrialized. Imports versus exports, but that's it. Okay? Any questions or arguments? I can't get students to ask questions. Even, I have to give them extra credit. Okay. Yeah.
I've heard some different people's opinions on this, but I was curious on what your opinion was, what you think Woodrow Wilson meant when he said, I am a most unhappy man. I have unwittingly ruined my country. A great industrial nation is controlled by its system of credit.
That's true.
But what was your thoughts with that quote?
He's right. But he caused a problem because he identified. Okay? Doctor, I always call him Dr. Professor. President Thomas Woodrow Wilson, PhD. Stick the academy with that. No, he said that. I had some. I've been trying to find the one that you regret of going into World War I. But it's almost impossible. These people take that stuff down. But that's absolutely true. If you saw a picture of Woodrow Wilson before World War I, very happy, very happy. When after World War I, they took a picture of him. He had a stroke. He looked like he just had a vision of hell. And that poor man, I think he understood what he did. And I don't, hopefully had less rights. Well, I could say, because he created, most of the trouble we got now came from that progressive era, Teddy Roosevelt. And we're living with that now. And this progressive foreign policy, before we interfered in the lives of Americans, now we got to interfere in the lives all over the world. But I mean, you take a look at the damage that was caused by us getting to World War I. And then every one of these wars is damage, because World War I led to World War II. And then I lived through Vietnam. I saw what happened. Okay? And the culture changed. There was no drug problem. I go to school, and nobody had drugs. They thought if you had marijuana, people ostracized you. Get out of here. Okay? And that started to slide down. I'm at the point now, I go to, I fortunately, by God's grace, did not have to go to Vietnam. But I go with all my friends who did. And I have to tell you, luncheon most of the time, I got 2 or 3 of them I go with, and the veterans from Iraq are having real problems. The suicide rate for Vietnam is twice what the casualty rate was. Iraq is 22, meant a day committing suicide. So, am I anti-war? Well, Wilson, you're absolutely right in that. It's true. He's got a voluminous number of writings, so you find the exact page, you'd have to probably go through. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Why do we call it inflation instead of debauchement?
Currency debasement?
Why do we call it? I think debauching the currency is a better old school term.
I agree.
Why do we call it inflation instead of that? Why do we allow this terminology that makes 9 people out of 10 say, "Hey, prices are going up," instead of saying my dollar is going down the toilet?
I think it's just become a custom of the press to label it that way. By the way, the definition, I have it in my book. You put Veryser and you can see the book I wrote. The definition of inflation before, if you take the dictionaries, was increase in the supply of money and credit greater than the amount of gold. That was before Roosevelt. Afterwards, they changed it to prices. And so and I think it's just to kind of hide it, but you're absolutely right, sir. Absolutely right. We should call it currency debasement. I mean, look, I don't have a quarter on me, but all of you are carrying debased currency. I mean, that quarter isn't silver. It was when I was a boy. Okay? That's what the Roman emperors did. That's what Henry VIII did. That was a bunch of them did. They would take the coins and melt them down, mix them with lead, and put their face on it. So it's as valuable as it was before. But it was currency debasement. That collapsed the Roman Empire and caused all kinds of things. We have debauched currency today. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
I'm curious what your thought on one particular proposal. Right? So Milton Friedman evolved his views over the years. I think his last proposal was his best one, so I'm curious your thoughts. But his last proposal was he basically said, like, look, going back to the gold standard would be difficult because you have to figure out, right, how to peg the dollar back to gold again. And if you peg the value wrong, you could potentially make problems worse again. So his suggestion was, well, if you look at the way it originally was, the government coined the gold, but then private banks issued their own private paper banknote. And so it was up to then banks they could increase or decrease their paper supply as much as they wanted, but at least the gold itself.
The gold was there.
So his proposal was take the current monetary base, freeze that, make it illegal for the federal government or Federal Reserve to ever increase or decrease the monetary base, and essentially create a U.S. dollar standard. Now let private banks take in the U.S. dollar as if it were gold and issue their own private banknotes that are backed by this fixed supply of U.S. dollars. So it wouldn't be a gold standard, but it would be a fixed supply of U.S. dollar standard.
And you could tag the gold. Milton changed his mind on that, by the way. Because when I read his first book when I was college, I don't know whether I was happier when I was younger, but you do get happier as you get older. I'll tell you that. And statistics have proven that. His book, Capitalism and Freedom, and he came out with this floating exchange rate system and all that. And that represented the change for Milton. It really did. Skousen told me a story that he was having dinner with Friedman. And he's laid down a $20 bill, and Skousen laid down a $20 gold piece. Of course, it was about $200 then. He says, Milton, you can have which one you want. And he walked away because he fought with us over gold. And it's the reason Reagan couldn't have done it. Reagan came within a decision going back on gold. And the Chicago school talked him out of it. And now we've had the mess. But but it was made, the proposal was made. Reagan wanted to do it. Trump talked about it. Okay? But I agree with you. Most times gold was restored. It was restored under a new currency. The Germans did it after World War II. The French did it. The Romans did it. Normally they go back to gold, but they issue a new coin or whatever else. And so he's right historically on that.
The term dollar itself, doesn't that signify some particular percentage of gold?
Yes, it does. It was a weight. Almost all these currencies were a weight. is the way to go.
Okay,
And I've
we have come to the end of our time. If somebody has another question for Harry, could you stick around
Oh, yeah,
for
I'll
a few
wait.
minutes?
I'll wait.
Otherwise, I want to encourage you to come back this evening at 7:30. Michael Tanner from the Cato Institute is going to be here. His topic is what kind of public policies do we need to help people your age prosper in the years to come?